Good afternoon. It's Friday the 6th of October, and this is my next vlog post for Vlogtober. I thought today I would talk a little bit about something which has been very an integral part of my spirituality for the last 27 years since I joined the monastery in 1990. And probably before that as well, when I was there as a postulant and as a visitor, and a visitor to other monasteries as well. Hello, Toby. Yes, that's right, I'm recording, so do stand in front of the camera. There's a good boy. There's no show without Toby. And I thought I would talk a little bit about Gregorian chant. Or plain song or plain chant. It has a number of different names. It's called Gregorian chant because it was piously thought to have originated with St. Gregory the Great, who was Bishop of Rome in the 5th century, 6th century? 5th century, I think. Possibly 6th. Actually, I think 6th century. That's right, because he sent St. Augustine to England in 597, so that would make it the 6th century. So he was Bishop of Rome and is one of the few popes to have be called the Great. Leo the Great, who was a predecessor of his, was Pope at the time of the Council of, was it Chalcedon or Nicaea? Anyway, doesn't matter. But not many popes have the appellation the Great, but Gregory is a significant pope and was probably the first monarchical pope, the first pope who took the place of the emperor in Old Rome. By the time of Gregory the Great, the Roman Empire had split in two. There was the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire. The Eastern Empire based at Byzantium, Constantinople, renamed by Constantine the Great as the New Rome, and the Western Roman Empire, which had been invaded by various of the Germanic tribes, the Lombards, the Vandals, the Goths, the Ostrogoths, and so on and so forth. So Gregory the Great effectively took on the role of consul and emperor when those positions had really fallen by the wayside in the Western Empire. Just as a historical footnote, the Roman Empire in the East, the Greek Roman Empire, didn't fall until 1425, so the Roman Empire lasted an awful lot longer than people realise. However, that's not the point of this particular episode. So, plain song is an integral part of it is for the Roman Church, the Latin Church of, based in Rome, the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church as it's often erroneously described. Plain song is considered the music most suited to the liturgical celebrations of the Catholic Church in the West. And even though other music has perhaps supplanted it, particularly English hymnody, I can't speak for other languages, but in English, possibly because of the rich tradition of Protestant hymnody, and many of those hymns, being theologically sound, have found their way into Catholic worship. Very often because they're based on scripture, and therefore there is nothing intrinsically within them that makes them unacceptable for use in Catholic worship, which itself bases most of its music on psalms and scripture. So the two major areas of plain song are the liturgy for the Mass, the Eucharistic liturgy, and there are ordinaries, the Kyrie, Gloria, Sanctus, Agnus Dei, and Credo, and the particular parts of the Mass, so things like the invitatory Antiphon, where people come into the church, and then the offertory, the communion Antiphon, the Graduale, and Alleluia, which are parts of the liturgy of the Word. And so the Roman Graduale, I have a copy of a Graduale here. And Graduale just means steps, because the old Roman liturgy, the Tridentine rite of Mass, the extraordinary form of the liturgy, the Old Latin Mass, there is a whole set of movements at the foot of the steps up to the altar, and at various points the priest will and the altar server will go up to different steps on the altar as part of the liturgy, which has mostly disappeared now. The steps are purely now to raise the platform where the altar is for people to see. But in the old rite, the steps played a significant part, and where you stood on which side of the altar, which step you stood on, which step the server was kneeling on, all had a significance, which led to the collection of music being called the Graduale. So I have some sample pages here, and as you can see, there's just a lot of text and a lot of neumes. Now, the most important thing to know about plain-song is that, well, no, before I get on to that, so the liturgy of the Mass is the main exposure that most Catholics would have to plain-song. But monks, in particular Benedictine monks, but any monks who have their daily prayer services in common rather than privately, would also have a lot of plain-song. And mostly Benedictines, but there are Carthusian chants as well, and that would be contained in Antiphonale Monasticum, which just means monastic antiphonal. So in here, although there are some psalms, it's mostly the antiphons that go with the psalms. So you would have two books. You'd have the Antiphonale, and you'd have this Psalterium Monasticum, the monastic psalter. And there are some antiphons in the Psalterium, and there are some psalms in the Antiphonale, but basically you had the two books side by side. So you sang the antiphon from one book and then the psalms from the other. And the monastic office is based upon a text from Psalm 118, which is 7 times a day, I shall praise you, O Lord. Though in fact, it was 9 times a day. So the monks' day would be organised around vigils, which happen during the night. In most modern monasteries, they happen about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. But they used to, in Carthusian monasteries and in old Benedictine monasteries in the Middle Ages and into the modern time, they would happen at 3 o'clock in the morning. So you'd go to bed after Compline, get up in the middle of the night and do matins, then do some study, then have lauds, and then the day begins. So the order was matins at some time during the night or early morning, lauds, which was the main service of the morning. It's a major office. All of these are called offices. So there's major offices and minor offices. So the matins and lauds. Then there were the little hours, the little offices: prime, terce, sext, and none. So that's the first hour, prime, the third hour, terce, the 6th hour, sext, and the 9th hour, none. So that's now 6 offices, and there would then be vespers, which was as the name would suggest in Latin, the evening prayer, and then finally compline, which was the short service before you had the great silence overnight, when no talking was permitted, and basically people went to bed straight after compline. And inside, so that's actually 8 times a day I'm praising you already, and inside of all of that you then also have the liturgy of the Mass. So there were 9 times for most monasteries when the monks would gather together, and they gathered in 2 choirs facing each other and sang antiphonally, which means that one side would sing the first 2 lines of a verse, and then the other side would sing the next 2 lines, and then back and forth, back and forth. And this kind of repertoire, where with the antiphonal choirs singing towards each other, was based upon the Ambrosian model in Milan. Aurelius Ambrosius, or St. Ambrose as he's known now, was the Roman governor of the northern province where Milan is based, and was acclaimed bishop by the people. He was responsible for introducing a style of antiphonal singing of prayer in the church, pretty much as St. Gregory the Great is considered to have founded plainsong, but he didn't actually necessarily write any of it. St. Ambrose did, however, we know, wrote 4 hymns that are still used in the Latin liturgy to this day. So I thought, having said all of that, I might give you, although I enjoy singing, but I don't have a great voice, but I thought I'd give you some samples of the kind of music that would be involved. So I think, first of all, most people will be familiar with the Missa de Angelis, which in most Catholic churches in the modern era, this would be what most Catholics would consider to be the Latin form of the ordinary of the Mass. And that's the Kyrie, Gloria, and so on. So I'll put in a snippet of the first line, the Kyrie, here. Kyrie eleison. I hope your ears aren't bleeding from that particular rendition, but just to show some of the variation, I will also now give you a snippet of the same part of the liturgy, the Kyrie, but from ordinary Sundays, in Dominicis per annum, in the ordinary Sundays of the year. And there are 2 forms of this, because the original form is 10th century. The XS there indicates that that's the 10th century, siècle being the Latin word for century, or the 10th age, more literally. And then a more embellished form in the 11th to 14th centuries. Well, so the 14th, actually the 11th to the 16th centuries. A more embellished form of the same chant, which shows some of the development. Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison. Plainsong is a monophonic tune, which means basically there is one line of melody, and everybody, which no matter where their voice fits in the range of voices from bass through to treble, everybody sings the same line at the same time. Polyphony grew out of plainsong in the 12th and 13th centuries, but plainsong itself, in the purest sense, is a monophonic musical form. So, Toby, please, not just now. There we go, that's a good boy. So, having shown you some of the liturgy of the Mass, I think experiencing a little of the liturgy of the hours would go some way. Today is Friday, which in Latin means it's Feria Sexta, and because it's late afternoon, it's now moving towards the hour of Vespers, which is the hour of twilight, if you like. And so I thought I'd give you this antiphon and the first verse of the second psalm, which is basically blessed be the Lord my God. And I'll just explain a little of the notation that, sorry, some of the cards I've got inside the book are falling out. I'll explain a little of the notation you'll see here. So you have the line of the music, and as I say, this is a diatonic scale, so actually I don't think I said that. So it's a diatonic scale. That sounds incredibly complicated, but in fact that just means it goes do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re, do. It's tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And the point about the diatonic scale is that whichever key you happen to be in, the distance between the first and second note is always a tone, the distance between the second and third is always a tone, the distance between the third and the fourth is always a semitone, and then tone, 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 semitone to the end. What normally happens in Western music is that you'll have a treble clef and then you'll have sharps and flats put in there, the incidentals, so that you know which key you're in, and then the start note will be wherever you'll move it up and down the scale. So a G will be the second line of the stave, whereas an F would be the first space of the scale, and so on. So if you were in the key of G major, the Do would start on the second line. If you were in the key of F major, the Do would start on the first space. In plain song, they don't have those kinds of incidentals. There are the occasional, you can flatten and therefore naturalize particular notes, but generally speaking, the clef simply shows where in the diatonic scale you're starting. So this first line here would not necessarily equate to Do. I know this sounds slightly complicated, but what that basically means is that you can actually start this on whatever note you choose. And in fact, in the Middle Ages, it is apparent from the way the music is written that the reciting notes, the dominant notes, which on this case would be the third note in Benedict, that would be a G, whereas in modern plain song that's now A, which is a whole tone above. So we've actually shifted the sound of everything one tone higher. So you have the antiphon, Benedictus Dominus Deus meus, and then it says et non repetitor in salmo, because in fact if you look at the verse that comes with it, the very first line of the psalm is Benedictus Dominus Deus meus. And then so basically, having sung the antiphon, you don't then repeat the antiphon in the psalm itself, you simply go to the second line, which you'll see in the demonstration that's following shortly. And then at the very end, we've got this slightly queer assemblage of letters. Now these are vowels that come from the ending of the Gloria Patri in Latin, which is Saecula Saeculorum Amen. So it's A-U-R, A-U-O, A. A. So what this is basically saying is telling the musicians what the end of each line is going to sound like, which is going to be da 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 dun dun dun. So you just count in the beats from the end of the line, and that's when you start going down. So that's how everybody knows which notes to go up and down on. And at the very beginning, we've got this 6 F, and that's basically saying that it's a mode 6. So there are 12 modes in Gregorian plain song, and they all have different qualities, starting on slightly different parts of the diatonic scale, and therefore also having slightly different endings. And this is the standard mode 6 ending. And then at the very top, it gives you the psalm reference that the antiphon is taken from, which in this case is the first line of Psalm 143 in the Vulgate, rather than unfortunately, the numbering of psalms is slightly different in a Catholic and Protestant Bible, because some of the psalms can be split in two, and not to make life easy for each other, a couple of the psalms are split in different places, which means that the numberings are slightly different, although there are still 150 psalms and all the same text. It's just that they're numbered in slightly different ways. So that's just a brief explanation of the layout of the antiphon. And so I'll insert a clip of that antiphonous psalm here. Benedictus Dominus Deus meus, qui docet manus meas ad prelium, et digitos meos ad bellum. Misericordia mea et fortitudo mea, refugium meum et liberator meus, scutum meum et in ipso speravi, qui subdit populum meum sub me. So I wanted to talk a little bit The most famous diatonic scale is in fact the one that I gave you the example of, which was do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. And I'm not sure that people actually ever think, where does that come from? Was that a lyric invented by the writers of the Sound of Music, which is do, a deer, a female deer, and so on and so forth? Well, in fact, the answer is no. The answer comes from Plainsong. On the Feast of St. John the Baptist, which is the 24th of June, 6 months before the birth of Jesus, because St. Elizabeth was with child 6 months before the Blessed Virgin Mary was with child, and so John the Baptist's birthday is therefore 6 months before Jesus' birthday. There is a hymn which is quite an ancient hymn. It's thought to have been written in the 8th century by a Lombardic hymn writer called Paulus Diaconus, Paul the Deacon. And the verse is fairly basic. It's so that your servants may with loosened voices resound the wonders of your deeds, clean the guilt from our stained lips, O St. John. In other words, St. John, make us worthy to sing the praises of God with our voices. But I'll just get my hymn book. So the Liber Hymnarius rather, as you might expect, is the hymn book. The actual Latin text is ut queant laxis resonare fibris mira gestorum famili tuorum solve polluti labi reatum sancta Ioannis. Now the significant thing about that, ignore the ut for a moment, but the ut actually begins on do. And then the second line is resonare fibris. The first syllable of the second line is re and is one note up from do. The third syllable is of the first syllable of the third line is mi, as in mira gestorum, and then the fourth, and which is one note up, so it's going do re mi, and then up here we have fa, one note up, then we have sol and la, and this is actually the origin. This is the hexachord. Ut was used right the way through until the 19th century as the first note of the diatonic scale. It was ut, la, mi, fa, sol, la, and then you went to do. Well, actually you went to T, but the T was actually C, and the S from Sancta Ioannis was used. The ut was changed to do because do is a more open sound than ut. You close your mouth for u and you open it for do. So it's a better way to start a song. So that was why ut was changed to do. T in English is only in English. In the Romance languages of Latin, of French and Latin and Romanian and Spanish, it's still C. So it's do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. And the C comes from the S of Sancta Ioannis, and was actually only changed to T in English in order to allow the abbreviation of each of the notes to their first letter. With sol already having an S, C had to become T, which took away the purity of the idea. But anyway, so there we are. So I'll just I'll sing the first verse for you and pop it in here. Ut queant laxis resonare fibris mira gestorum famuli tuorum solve polluti labi reatum sancte Ioannis. And the other thing I wanted to talk about was the enjoyment of puns and puzzles that abounds in the Latin liturgy. The monks were very well educated. They were very clever men, often with a lot of time on their hands, and so they liked to put in little jokes, if you like. And we were all familiar with the illustrated manuscripts and the grotesque characters and the jokes in the illustrations down the side of pages of where idle illustrators have let their minds wander and fantasies grow. In the Christmas liturgy, actually in the Advent liturgy, there is a great octave the week before Advent. So the last 7 days of Advent leading up to Christmas are the what are known as the 7 bells for Bethlehem. And the climax of the evening liturgy of the Vespers liturgy are the Antiphoni Maiores, the great antiphons, also known as the great O's. And so each antiphon begins with an O and is basically the same overall antiphon but has different words. And the first one is O sapientia que ex ore altissime prodisti, O wisdom who comes from the mouth of the Almighty, or the Most High. The second one is O Adonai, et dux domus Israel, O Lord and leader of the house of Israel, O radix Jesse, O root of Jesse. And then O clavis David, O key of David, who unlocks, and scepter of the house of Israel, who unlocks our chains and frees us from sitting in darkness. O Oriens, O light of the sun rising in the east, O Rex Gentium, O King of the nations. And then finally, O Emmanuel, O Lord with us, Rex et Legifer Noster, Lord, King and Lawgiver. So there are 7 antiphons, and they begin O Sapientia, O Adonai, O Radix Jesse, O Clavis David, O Oriens, O Rex Gentium, O Emmanuel. If you write those 7 antiphons out, and I'll put them on the screen to give you an indication, if you write them out in order that they're sung, and then take the first letter of each, and then read backwards from the 23rd of December back down to the 17th, so you go E-R-O-C-R-A-S, Ero cras, which in Latin means tomorrow I will be. So at the end of the Vespers, on the day before Christmas Eve, the monks have finally completed an acrostic of antiphons which say, tomorrow I will be. And some very clever young monk arranging these great texts, titles of Jesus from the Old Testament, had enough time in his hands to realize this idea. I'll put a sample of the antiphon in here for you. O sapientia, que ex ore altissimi prodisti, ad tingens a fine usque ad finem fortiter, sua vita disponensque omnia, veni ad docendum nos viam prudentiae. So I hope that's been an interesting little foray into plainsong. I'm not a great exponent. I know a little bit. I prefer to pray my office and prayers in Latin. I don't have any issue with the English liturgy. I just prefer the Latin liturgy. I prefer it's had a much longer period of development. It's been around for 2,000 years, give or take. And in that time, there are some great treasures have been created, some great truths have been unearthed, and there is a depth and a tradition to plainsong which fits my own personal comfort and well-being with. My whole channel is called Hand-Me-Downs. I stand in a tradition and I hand on to the next generation, and in a sense that's what I'm doing with my prayers and my liturgy. So I just thought I'd share this little aspect of who I am. So I look forward to speaking to you again tomorrow. I will be doing a normal podcast tomorrow, but I will pop in, I think, another little Vlogtober cast as well, so that I keep the two series going separately. So thank you very much for spending time with me, and I'll speak to you again tomorrow. Bye.